Seeing none, we'll move on to motion number 7, opposition to austerity in the name of NIPSA. To propose and second that motion? Oh, sorry. There is a seconder. Can you come up to the front row?
Sisters and brothers, Carmel Gates, NIPSA, to propose motion 7. This motion has two very distinct parts, which are very clearly interlinked. The first one is about opposition to austerity and inequality, and the second one is about building and maintaining the unity of the working class in Ireland so that we can complete that battle against austerity. And I want to start by, as others have done, congratulating the workers of Greece, who twice this year have said no to austerity. First time by electing a left-wing government, the second time in the referendum. And I think we should congratulate those workers who stood against essentially the whole of corporate Europe, who stood against the banks, who stood against the bureaucrats, the European leaders, and said no. They stood against their own media, who threatened them that the banks were going to run out of money, their jobs were going to go, shops were going to close, old people were going to starve, and they still said no. And the reason they said no is they had nowhere else to go. No was the only thing that they could do because they have nowhere further to fall. And I think we need to emulate, we need to congratulate, and we need to applaud. They tell us that what Greece did is bad for Europe. The only Europe it's bad for is the Europe of the 1%, the vulture capitalists, the banks, a Europe of greed. It's good for the Europe of democracy, it's good for the Europe of the 99%, and it's good for us. It doesn't matter that the papers are now saying that it's going to cost Ireland €1 billion because of what Greece did. We are international workers and we support each other, and their struggle is our struggle. But I have to say that I think Jennifer McCann said earlier there's always more money, and we know that there is always more money. And if there isn't more money, then in the north of Ireland we are in trouble, because we know that poverty fueled sectarianism for the last 30, 40 years. And unless we build against austerity in the north, we are going to face potentially that same nightmare of back to sectarianism. I think we have to learn from the past, and this movement has to learn from the past, because this movement has been split in the past. It was split in the 40s when there was a division amongst British-based and Irish-based unions. What was partly a left-right split, but let's be realistic, was a split along nationalist lines. Our movement was also nearly split in the 1980s when people called for an Ulster TUC, and again it was clearly sectarian division, potentially growing within the movement. But we stood strong against it, comrades. We stood proud and we stood for working class unity, and we fought back against the sectarians. Now, in recent times, there are those within our movement who say that we should align potentially with some of the political parties. But working class unity is not just an aspiration. In the north, it's a life and death issue. It's literally a life and death issue. And therefore, when people say that we should align with one or other political party, if they say to us, well, the DUP has based itself on the working class, and people like Sammy Wilson, who's now pro-austerity, used to be Red Sammy, or if they say, well, there's elements within the Ulster Unionist Party who see themselves as Labour Unionists, or they say to us, well, there's those within Sinn Féin who are anti-austerity, and therefore we must align ourselves with them and build alliances with them. I have to say, comrades, the peace in the north is too fragile for us to engage in politics that would bring us into alignment with organisations who are seen to be voted on by one community or seen to represent one community. We need the political independence of the trade union movement in Ireland. We need the political independence of the trade union movement in the north. And therefore I would urge every sensible trade unionist hall, ensure the independence of the trade union movement. Build a movement that is ours, that is a class-based movement, a movement that is built on the unity of the working class, and do not allow ourselves to be aligned with any parties that workers north or south of the border will see as sectarian. Support the motion.
Seconder for the motion, please.
Brothers and sisters, Billy Lynn Nipsa to second the motion. And I'm not getting at any specific political party or political individual. But it sickens me to death to hear some of our local politicians standing up and saying that they're anti-austerity, and then they vote in the Assembly for pro-austerity measures. They voted in the Assembly, they cut the public service pension scheme so that our members have to work longer and pay more. They have cut and voted, all the political parties, to cut the compensation scheme in the public sector, which means if you're made redundant, your actual compensation is cut. And particularly at a time whenever the DUP and Sinn Féin have signed up to the Stormont House Agreement, I know it's a separate motion, where they have borrowed £700 million from the Reform and Reinvestment Fund in order to cut 20,000 jobs. That's pro-austerity. Anti-austerity would be to borrow £700 million to create 20,000 jobs. That is real anti-austerity. You know, in my area of the public sector, the cuts are real. They're happening now. They're happening at this minute. This year, in my area, 2,500 jobs will go out the door. They will be away. Come September this year, starting in September, 800 jobs, over 800 jobs will go. That is not anti-austerity. That is pro-austerity. But I agree with Carmel. It's essential that we maintain the unity of the trade union movement, and we maintain the unity of the working class, not just in the north, but north and south, and internationally. And we have to continue to oppose sectarianism, because as you know, in Northern Ireland, everything becomes sectarianised. Even, I was going to say even flags, but even foreign flags become sectarianised, as we know. You can't say you're anti-austerity and then vote for pro-austerity measures. It's the old saying, you can't ride two horses with the same bum. You're either one or the other. What I'm going to say next, I haven't discussed with the General Secretary, but maybe we should take a leaf out of the book of Greece. Maybe we should have a referendum, north and south, on austerity, whether we're for austerity or against austerity, so that the ordinary people of Ireland, north and south, can make that decision. And I know what that decision will be. It will be exactly the same decision as in Greece. It will be Archie. It will be no. It will be nil. Or if you come from Ballymoney, it will be no.
Deirdre MacDonald, ASTI. As I listened today to the various speakers, I found myself in total agreement with everything that was being said. And the real joy of this motion, as we are an all-Ireland organisation, is that it refers to austerity in north and south, east, west, as in whether you go to Spain or Greece or whatever. Austerity is austerity. But when do good words become mere rhetoric? I respectfully suggest, fellow trade unionists, that when they are not followed up by action. Therefore, Congress, I propose that now is the time for us to plan our action, to change our rhetoric into action. Talk is cheap. We have stood idly by while the government policies have brought about growing inequity in our society. Corporate structures that will facilitate privatisation of our water infrastructure. Huge increases in child poverty. While a government continues to give tax relief for property speculation after coming into office. And as trade unionists, while governments fail to significantly improve the working conditions and rights of workers. Workers that, as time goes by, will have to work for far longer than their retired peers. Please, let us stop the rhetoric. Let us start the action. Actions speak louder than words. I ask Congress, as the motion does, how are we going to bring about the changes that we want? And when are we going to do it? Thank you.
Tommy McGlone, NTO. Delegates, whenever we think of austerity, we don't always think of it in the local sense. We tend to look elsewhere, to the likes of Greece or Spain. And when we do, we see that the sectarian divide that exists in the north pales. It is right that this motion in the last section asks that we should ensure that the trade union movement is not too closely identified with political movements. But really, it is not us who uses these sectarian labels. They are not important to our values. What is important is that we take a principled stand against austerity regardless. The austerity cuts to the education budget in Northern Ireland mean that schools face job cuts that will result in a loss of 800 teaching posts. We have already lost all the young signature project teachers, and now with the loss of more teaching posts, schools face the prospect of overcrowded classrooms. The funding for classroom assistants and the support staff that is needed to help the most vulnerable pupils in our schools continues to be under threat. The finance needed to properly resource schools and provide our teachers and children with the modern tools and equipment essential to learn and to keep up with our European neighbours is under threat. The resources needed to maintain the schools and keep them warm, welcoming places for our children, along with the resources needed for special needs provision, breakfast clubs, extracurricular after-schools clubs, homework clubs, school meals and transport is under threat. However, from INTO's point of view, campaigning and resisting the austerity agenda alone will not improve the prospects of our future generations. INTO calls on Congress to demand investment in education as the key economic driver essential to secure a better future for the children in schools today rather than the future they currently face. Education needs union involvement and leadership. This can't come solely from the INTO. Congress must persuade and encourage all activists from the different teaching unions in the north to campaign in their schools and wider community. Only with their participation can we truly ensure that the fight against austerity is seen as cross-community. When Nick Ictu called a day of action in March, the teachers and public service workers from the Falls Road and Sandy Row melted into one parade as they made their way to the rally at the City Hall. These workers from different sides of Belfast were united in their opposition to austerity, and they continue to be united in their opposition to austerity because it is having a negative impact on their everyday lives. For their sake, INTO was proud to support this motion.
Thank you. Seeing no more speakers on motion number 7.